Welcome, guys, to another episode of The Candy Show. I'm your host, Candy. We are live here in Chicago, Illinois. I have a special guest, guys. I want you to welcome Mr. Kevin Ross, CEO and Global Brand Manager of Twoguard Media Group. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Mr. Kevin Ross.
Peace, peace. How's everybody doing? Glad to be here. It's an honor. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, come on now, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much for allowing me in your world today.
Hey, you know what? It's Friday, TGIF, and I can't think of a better way to spend it than hanging out with you and talking a little industry stuff and things of that nature. When you came along and offered the opportunity to interview, I'm usually the guy behind artists and behind the projects. So, I've never been a big in front of the camera person, but I'm honored to be here, and I give all praises to my Lord and Savior,
Amen.
Jesus Christ.
Amen. I'm gonna tell you what. This is why I like to do the Candy Show because it's not always about the people that are in the front. I feel like it's a team effort. So I love to hear people's backstories, and I love to be able to give those voices, provide those platforms for the voices for those who are on the back, who make things happen for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I've always been that actually. I started off as a DJ, so I was hiding behind a DJ booth and playing records and helping break artists that way. I worked at Tower Records, a place called Tower Records years ago, and that's behind the counter selling music to the general public. And so I've always been kind of the secondary, but the first line of the industry when it comes to music and things of that nature. So, that's a role that I'm used to. Plus, that keeps you humble.
Well,
You know what I mean?
I'm gonna tell you what. I can definitely hear that voice, that DJ voice. So,
Yeah.
gosh. Okay, guys, let me tell you a little bit about how I met Kevin. I met Kevin back in 2018. I was here. Kevin Shine had a musical event, putting on his music event called.
It was the Writing Sessions America. Shout out to WSA
Yes.
and my man K Shine, another veteran, a great guy who is responsible for a lot of artists getting an opportunity. So shout out to Kev.
Yeah, and wow, oh my goodness, I had a chance to just interview Kevin just a little bit at the time, but we here, we now we're gonna do a Candy Show full episode of an interview. So come on, Kevin, tell me a little bit about what's going
Little about
on.
it, little
I
bit.
know you have a lot going on to tell just a little snippet of how you came about getting to Two Guard Media Group.
Okay, so the evolution of Twoguard. So when I was 10 years old, I started really listening to songs on the radio way back when. I'm not going to say when because, probably some of your viewers and listeners, some might be able to relate, others would be like, I wasn't even born back then. But I was listening to the radio, and I used to be fascinated by how certain songs would make you feel, like how music really connected with your feelings. So if you heard an up tempo song, you were happy, and then they would have these love songs, in the '60s and in the '70s and '80s and '90s, and you would hear that. And you would be if you were in love, that really struck a chord with you. If you were sad, there were songs about sad songs, love, songs with sense of humor, everything. So I became fascinated with that at an early age. And so there was I grew up in Sacramento. I'm a California guy.
Okay, now
And
come on,
shout out Sacktown, California, Northern California.
Knows how to-
Um,
I ain't gonna lie, listen, y'all. These lights are hot as crap up in here.
Look,
So,
I'm glad that I'm usually I would be sweating like Keith Sweat. I'm actually pretty good today, strangely enough.
up here in the
So
Candy Show, we do it natural, we do it raw, we do it real. So
there's
you know what?
There ain't no faking it like
It-
up in here.
I
Yep.
ain't even gonna lie. Go ahead.
There is
You from
no faking it.
California?
So I'm from California originally, in Northern California, and there was a radio station called KPOP, K-pop AM. They were only on for 6 hours in the day, and it was all sponsorship paid for. So it's not like like your mainstream radio stations you hear now. It was the only black music they had in Sacramento. So every
wow.
day at 6 o'clock, I would take this little Radio Shack radio and put it up to my ear and listen to the DJs and listen to the music and just the whole experience. And they had a thing called Rate a Record where you could call in. They'd play a new song every week, and you call in and say what you think, right? So they played this song one day, and I'm like, yo, that's that's a hit. That's bananas. So I'm dialing. Back then they had the dial-up phone. I'm
Oh
dialing.
my
Right, they had
gosh.
the dial-up joint. So
Rotary.
I'm dialing. You got to keep hitting the button to hit redial, right? So I call up and they answered the phone. I couldn't believe it. It's just funny how God works, right? Because ordinarily they would never answer the phone when I was trying to request songs, all that stuff. Never, but they.
DJ, please pick up the phone on a request line. All right. All right, go
See, I
ahead.
was, gonna-
I
I was getting
had
ready to
to.
start the beat.
This is what happens when you have music all up in your
Right,
head and your brain and your
right. I
body.
was getting ready to
So
start the beat.
go ahead.
So at this time, I was, just learning how to DJ. I bought two realistic turntables from Radio Shack and a realistic mixer 4 channel, whole 9 yards. So, but I called up and they answered and they put me on the radio.
Oh, snap.
And they said, "So, what's your name? Where are you calling from?" I said, "I'm Kevin. I'm calling from Sacramento. Calling from Davis." And they said, "So, what'd you think of the song?" I said, "Man, that's a hit. That's a #1 record." And they said, "What do you know about like #1? I said, "Oh, well, that's Billboard. I read Billboard magazine." So they said, "You know what? Because you say it's a #1 record, we're gonna play it again." So they played the song again, and that song was Funkadelic, Knee Deep,
Oh,
and it went to #1 3 weeks later. And that's when I knew I was in the right business. So after that, I started DJing. I would DJ, once I got to college. Shout out to Phi Beta Sigma. I got to college and I would DJ our fraternity parties and things like that. And I became a student of music. I would look at my mom and dad's record collection and I would turn the album cover over and I would read where it was recorded, who played drums, what type of keyboards were used, what type of drums, Linn drums, Synclavier, all of that stuff. So I started really studying it and I just fell in love with it. So ultimately, I started working for a record store called Barney's Good Time Music in Davis, California, while I was in college, and that led me to meeting record company representatives. And then I got offered a job in 1995 to go work for Motown Records in
oh,
Los Angeles.
oh, wow.
Yeah,
But I
and
mean, how did you feel at that time?
so I was freaked out. Up to that time, I had been working at record stores, so I had been meeting artists like Garth Brooks, The Brat when she first came out, came through Tower Records was the #1 record store in the world at that point. So all of the
Wow.
artists would come through Tower Records to do record album signings and things of that nature. So I was pretty used to being around the artist, but when you have a label like Motown, that's iconic.
Yes.
That's like for that to be my first job is a blessing from God. Period. So they actually that's the first time I'd ever been flown somewhere. They flew me down from Sacramento to Los Angeles. Now they turned me right around. They flew me in that morning, sent my butt home that night. But on Southwest Airlines, by the way. And about a week later, they called me and told me I got the job. And so I packed up all my stuff, drove to Los Angeles, and I started working with Boys to Men, Johnny Gill, 702. Um, at that time, the label still had some heritage artists like Diana Ross, The Temptations. I got to meet Stevie Wonder in my first week in the office. My man Mike Bivens, shout out Mike Biv 10 Records. Motown, that's was another bad creation, and he put those artists out.
Well, I gotta interrupt
Right,
now. I
right,
know you
right.
know now.
Candy Girl.
You already know. New Edition is my all-time favorite group, so
Mm-hmm.
you already know.
Mm-hmm. So,
Shout out.
yep, yep. And I actually shout out to the tour, which was a fantastic tour for those guys. So, yeah, so that's how I started. And then it was a sales position. But for me, I had been used to being active as a DJ, as working in a record store, selling music to people, selling people on new artists. They like, what's new? What's good? I was the guy when you come in the record store that you would talk to about what was new and what was hot. That's what I wanted. I still wanted that. So I found out that's called promotion. So I said, okay, I want to do promotion. So I got an opportunity once they had a new radio we had a radio promotion department, and they cleared all that out because they were trying to improve the company, et cetera, make some changes. So they had some positions open up. So there was this little white lady that used to run the pop music department. They called her name was Barbara Seltzer, little white Jewish lady, and she was really like really tough because it was really at that time there weren't very many female executives. So she had come over from Madonna's label over to Motown.
Wow.
Really tough lady, wonderful lady, and she talked real fast. Like she talked like this all the time. Hey Ross, get in here, get over here. I don't know why they got you. They're wasting you away in sales. You need to come work for me. You need to come work. You got a great personality. You got a gift for gab. You need to come work for me. And I would laugh it off at every meeting. I would laugh it off at all the company gatherings until one day she called me and said, "Come down to my office." So I go down to her office, and she had two pieces of paper sitting on her desk. She said, "Sit down." She said, "I have two positions open. You got two opportunities." I said, "Okay." And she says, "You can have Atlanta or you can have Chicago." So at that time, right, this is you're talking 96 by this time.
Wow.
So at that time, Atlanta was like the hotbed of black music. You had Outkast, you had LaFace, you had Usher, you had TLC. You had, Bobby Brown even had some things in Atlanta at that time, right? So, Jermaine Dupri, who I'm just love Jermaine Dupri, right? So I'm like, that's it. I pointed that paper, bam. I said, that's where I want to go. She said, "You're going to Chicago." And I said, "Okay."
Oh, she got you.
So I just sat here, yeah. So I just sat there and I looked for a minute. And I said, "Okay." So she said, "Here's what I can afford to pay you." And she writes that down and slides the piece of paper across the desk. And I looked at it and I was like, wow. Because living in LA, even at that time, I was making almost kind of a minimum salary, but it was okay. It wasn't like I was broke by any means, but what she put on that paper was twice what I was making in Los Angeles, and I could live for half of that in Chicago. So I said, okay,
Hey, that
I'm
was a
going.
no-brainer.
I said, you know what? Up to that point, all I knew about Chicago was these Bayer aspirin commercials, right? Where everybody was sick with the flu and cough medicine, and they was bundled up, shivering, and they would show, these old, all these old time clips of people freezing. And I said, man. But I said, for this money, I can buy me some. I'm gonna buy me some coats and buy me some scarves and stuff like that. So I accepted the offer and I moved to Chicago. And I've been here now for 25 years.
Wow.
My first 15 years of that was radio promotion experience. So I was working with radio stations here, WGCI, B96, and still doing my thing. But in a wonderful, wonderful market. The Midwest is wonderful. It's where I've come of age and become a better man, a better person. I found God here. Shout out to Bill Winston Ministries, and it's just been a great experience for me. I'm a Chicagoan now.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the deal. I after that started working for like Warner Brothers Records. I've done stints with Capitol Records. I've worked with Avant, Eric Benet, um, Tyrese, Anita Baker,
Oh, come on.
Snoop Dogg, Katy Perry, Tamia.
Oh, God.
Oh my goodness, the names are just endless.
That is just so much talent, longevity
hmm
talent.
And great talent, not
Ooh,
just average. You're talking Anita Baker is like legendary. You know what I mean? And
one of
those
a
types of
kind.
opportunities only come along once in a lifetime. So I'm very, very grateful for all of that. So your original question was, how did I get to my own company now? Right? So
That's okay because we had to again. I have to say it again here on the Candy Show. We have to make sure that people know where you came from in order to know
know
where
where you
you're
are.
at.
Right? Exactly. So
Go ahead.
all of that experience. And this is probably for those of you who are getting into the industry or want to get into the industry. I had all of that experience helping other people. So how do you take that so that you can now control your own destiny and help yourself and create your own company, things of that nature. I worked for some departments that didn't give money to black music, right? The black music department didn't get financed
Wow.
the way other departments did. So I was left to really be creative in order to still get results. So with that type of experience, and I had to be my own street team person sometimes. I had to be my own PR person sometimes. I had to introduce myself to Ebony Magazine and Vibe Magazine. And then when the artists would come to town, I was the one who would take them up there because we didn't have a PR person to do it. So
Is this where the urban department started coming into play, where the labels started having an started developing specific urban departments? That way, they had enough people or people to handle our music.
they've always had that. They would employ people, but it's one thing to employ people. It's quite another to take money and put it in the artist's budget, right? So we're employed, but we don't have money to. We didn't have money in certain situations to spend, in really getting the artist exposed the way our pop counterparts did. So the record companies have always had those same departments. That's not the issue. The issue is the money that goes into the artist budget. That's where the artists, how much are they going to spend on advertising? How are they going to spend money to put the artist on the road? All of those types of things. I've done more driving with artists than flying. We hopped in a truck and we drove the Midwest. We drove to Milwaukee. We drove to Kansas City. We drove to Detroit. We drove to Cleveland. That's, because it's easier to do it that way, it's cheaper. So that experience, though, and this is the way God works, always leads you where you're supposed to go. Because was complaining all this, oh my God, we don't have this money. But when it came time, I finally was working for Capitol Records in 2009, 2008, 2009, and I got laid off. And
Okay, help me understand. Is that when the
mhm,
business started changing? Where
business had already been changing up to that point.
okay,
So what you were seeing then, you saw Napster, right? So that was kind of the advent.
downloads.
That's when record companies started losing money because this was free music now. So you're encroaching on that. This was replacing the CD, which was driving sales and driving revenue. So once you had things like Napster giving your consumer free music, then you started to see those revenues drop, and record companies started laying people off, dropping artists, stuff like that. But for me, it was this weird thing. It was almost a relief. I'd been working for other people for so long, and in certain situations, they were never. TD Jake says you'll never be appreciated for your work. You'll never be compensated properly. More likely than not, you'll never really be appreciated for
No,
what you do.
no,
That's not the way. That's not the way this country's structured. It's not structured for the average worker
no.
to get the credit or to get to be compensated, right? So the best thing you can do is work for God. You got to work for God and then hope that that is in sync with what you want to do,
Wow.
which is what happened with me. So when I did get laid off, I remember the day. Um, it was a couple of weeks after I had been on a conference call, and we had at that time, and again, the places I've worked, I love every one of them. I love every one of my bosses. I love all the people that gave me a chance. So this is not negative towards them at all, nothing like that. But it's just situational. And we were on the phone on a conference call talking about our goals for some artists, and I think we had in the Billboard Top 20 at that time for Urban AC, we had like four artists, right? And we had actually been voted by Billboard Magazine the second best Urban AC label
Come on.
behind RCA, who had Usher, R. Kelly, Charlie Wilson, Jasmine Sullivan, and we still were number two, right? Yet we were still getting yelled at on this conference call.
Oh wow.
And and
Oh, wow.
and it was a means of motivation. It's their way to motivate, but for me, I'm thinking with what we had and the tools that we had, and we were still able to achieve that, but yet it's not
Not
enough.
enough.
That wasn't. So after a while, that just wasn't for me. And so when I got laid off, I think I kind of cried a little bit. I think a little tiny tear came down. And then when Human Resources called me, I went in the living room, and that's when I started watching All My Children again. On daytime television, I stopped shaving for about a month. I sat around in my drawers and kind of lived off of my severance, and like Tom Hanks in Castaway. That's kind of how I was looking crazy, and. Then the rent came due a few months later, and I said, "Well, what am I going to do?" So, I had all these relationships, and I said, "Why don't I just, hire myself out as a consultant?" Because it was almost clockwork. After every Christmas, they would lay people off, like right after
So
the
they
fourth
want them to give
quarter,
those bonuses, huh?
right? They lay people off. So, I said, there are artists out there that still wanted to put music out, and a lot of artists were being dropped from labels, but they still wanted to get on the road. They still wanted to go to radio. They still wanted to get shows in markets. And how could they connect still without the assistance of the record
The big
company? So I started hiring myself out as an independent consultant. And that's how I started. The first person I worked for was Dallas Austin. And we had an artist named Sammy. And Sammy had a song
Sammy,
that was used to
the
be Lil Sammy.
tall now Sammy.
Yeah, that's the tall, dark that women love, chocolate guy. Yeah. So he was coming off of being Lil Sammy. So no one was really believing in him at radio. They said, he had a young audience back then. What can he do now? So Dallas had a song called Come With Me. And we took the song, and we are actually the first independent label to ever take a song to number one on the R&B chart without the assistance of a record company.
Wow. Still to this day?
We're still number one. We're the first one. The first
Wow.
one.
Wow.
Come With Me caught on at what is now iHeart, but was back then called Clear Channel. And it caught on in Milwaukee, Clear Channel, then Detroit, and then they started talking to each other across the country about the song and gave it a shot. And it went up the charts after that, and so we took it to number one. So that's kind of how I knew I was heading the right direction.
Sometimes he gives you that sense of you put your input in, and then when someone confirms that input is exactly like it's right, like
Exactly.
you
Like that
know
day
you
I
have a
called that
pitch.
radio station when I
Yes.
was 10 years old, or 12 years old. That's confirmation.
Yes.
And I've had little parts of confirmation throughout my life and my career that let me know I was headed in the right direction. So after Sammy, I started working with Dwelle out of Detroit. He was doing his own thing independently. Eric Roberson, a lot of big independent, legendary, what I call legend independent artists who just didn't really need radio. They were just on the road, and they were just built their own audience. And so not only did I work those projects, I watched how they did it and I learned from them. So I learned about independence. And so that's how Twoguard was born. It's really funny, actually. When I first was going to work for Dallas, I was going to jump on a conference call. I didn't even have a name for my company. I was just Kevin Ross, this guy in Chicago. So the night before, I started going through names and writing a whole bunch of names down on paper, and nothing was sticking. And then I think I wrote the number. I wrote two, and I thought it was two music or two something. I said two guard because I'm a big basketball guy, and when I would play basketball, I used to play two guard.
God. Okay.
So I said, Twoguard, that sounds kind of cool. So I said, Twoguard Media, Twoguard Media, Twoguard Media. And it flowed. So I did a hand-drawn, I'll never forget this. I did a hand-drawn logo that looked like a Chinese T. And it was Twoguard Media. And then I ran that next morning to a place called Minuteman Press and got me some business cards made up. And I had a meeting, and that was the first meeting, and that's how it started. And it's been ever since I've been rolling.
Oh wow. I mean, I tell you what, guys, he just gave us a good earful, but it was a good earful because it was educational.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a break, and we're gonna come back, and then we're gonna go find out where we are now today with Twoguard Media Group and Mr. CEO and global brand
Brand
manager
manager. That
Kevin
sounds.
Ross.
I added the global part on because it sounds cool. It's really just brand manager, but that's fine.
All right, guys, we'll be right back.
All right.
Now, you touched a little bit about how and what actually got you started with Twoguard Media Group.
hmm
Give us a little history on that.
So, my first client ever was Dallas Austin. And Dallas, who produced quite, obviously TLC, legendary music producer. Um,
Aaliyah, he
yeah,
had, wasn't he doing her video?
he was everything. I mean, he just, he was Dallas at that point was pretty much the go-to guy. Monica, he did Monica's album, all of that stuff. He's working with L.A. and Babyface and Jermaine Dupri. So um, by this time, he wanted to have his own production company called DARP, DARP, which is Dallas Austin Recording Projects. And no record label would pick it up. So he financed it out of his pocket. So he knew that you needed to have, just like a record label, representatives in each market. So my name came up, and they set up an interview, and he had an artist named Sammy. I don't know if you remember Lil Sammy.
I remember you telling us about
Right, yeah,
that.
little Sammy, right? So now he's Big Sammy, and all women are falling all over him. He all chocolate now. I'm like, I knew him when he was like this. Y'all, I don't know what y'all looking at because he's
Little Sammy.
right. But the record label, Capitol Records at the time, had given up on him because they thought he was just a child act. Young Lil Sammy, that was it. Anybody with LIL, like now every rapper is Lil something.
Hmm.
But back then, Lil meant your career was truncated, and that was it. You only gonna make it after once you became that wasn't gonna happen. So Dallas believed in him as an artist, so he gave us a song called "Come with Me," and we took the song, and we got it onto some stations. We got some radio stations to give it a shot, and it ultimately started to grow. But once it reached Clear Channel, which is now iHeartRadio, and Milwaukee down here, down the street, St. Louis. They all started talking to each other on their conference call that they would have every week, and they said, "Hey, there's this song by this guy Sammy. Y'all got to try this song. We keep getting requests." And so we're the first independent company ever to take a song to number one on Billboard without the help of a record label.
Mm.
So that's how I knew I was headed in the right direction. You know what I mean? I've been blessed with situations like that my whole career. Like Tank, Tank was pretty much after he had had a couple of hits. They thought he was this nice guy with a nice body wearing Timbs and in his drawers on stage all the time. And that was going to be it. So we came with Please Don't Go, which is still his biggest record of his career. And we took that to number one. Eric Benet. A lot of people thought Eric was done. He was at Warner Brothers. They weren't believing in him at all. We took a song called You're the Only One. And it got started here in Chicago, V103. Shout out to V103. And once it got started in Chicago, then it spread across the country, same thing. And You're the Only One, probably still his biggest record of his
Mm.
career. And so I was on all of those teams. And that's how I started. That's how I started my own company.
But when we're talking specifically about Twoguard Media, give us what is it that Twoguard Media does and
hmm
exactly. Now, I know we were talking off camera and you mentioned about you like to help people.
Right. Give people the opportunity. I wanted to create a platform where an artist from the West Side who had a song that wasn't on WGCI could get the opportunity to get that song on GCR, or at least get it heard. Right? An opportunity that if there's an artist that plays guitar and is doing really well and playing at different lounges and things on the South Side and has a great following, that they get an opportunity to get on WCIU because WCIU does play, performing artists. They have music for their morning shows. So I started a company and a platform that would allow for that to happen, kind of a bridge or a farm team, as it were. So that's what Two Guard Media is about, giving you media opportunities, giving you performance opportunities, giving you exposure opportunities that you would have if you were at a record label, except you're doing it yourself now, and I'm the record label.
Wow. Now, who
That's it in
does
a
that?
nutshell.
Who does that? Who does that?
Well, a lot of people have tried, and I was always a big fan of the Hollywood, um, of the Hollywood companies that would represent actors. I had the same. That's the same concept. They said I wanted to do it for artists.
I get it. Trust me, I already know that
Hmm.
concept. I
Same
already know.
concept. So it's been tough because when you have artists that haven't been in a structured environment or have never been to a certain level, they can't conceive of what you're telling them until you actually start to show them. Some of them you even show, and then I also like I've even worked with public announcement when the group public announcement, people thought that was it for them. We came up with a song called Fireworks, and I got it on V103 for them, and that helped them start being able to perform places again. So
So are you also offering artist development as well?
artist development, all of those things.
Okay.
Again, the same thing that you would have at a record label, because I pretty much working for those cheap record labels that didn't give us money to work. I had to be the person to learn all of those skills. So I learned PR. I knew artist development because I started off my career as a DJ. All a DJ is an A&R person, right? That's all a DJ is an A&R person. You're deciding, you're looking at the crowd, and you're trying to figure out what they're gonna like. Same thing they do at a record label. They put out a single.
Wow.
So I had all these skills already, and so that's what I put into the company. And now where I am, I represent all different kinds of brands. As social media started to grow, I realized it wasn't just artists that needed that service. It's somebody who wrote a book. It's somebody who has a restaurant. It's somebody who does poetry. It's somebody who doesn't have the opportunity or doesn't have that bridge between where you are and getting the exposure right here. This is the bridge, and that's what Twoguard is about. So we started working with authors. I'm proud of I had an author, Audrey Todd. She went to number one on Amazon with her book,
Wow.
and I had her on television. And just WGN now is the media partner. Rolling Out magazine. I'm getting ready to put two clients in Rolling Out. So that's really it. Is the bridge between where you are and your platform, and getting it out there, because everyone now is a brand.
Yes.
Everyone is a brand,
Everybody.
and
Hmm.
every brand needs exposure. I don't care who you are, and I don't care if you're doing great in your neighborhood. You certainly want to do great in the next neighborhood across the way, and the neighborhood across 94, and all that stuff. So that's really what Two Guard is about.
Got a couple of questions before we get out of here because I know you're very busy man.
Oh, we can hang out we hang out all day.
Okay, well we're
I
gonna hang
stopped
out all
sweating
day.
now with them lights. I'm good now. We can sit here all day.
Shoot. Okay. All right. Um, do you think what do you think about the way things have changed? Because you mentioned earlier about looking at CDs, looking on the back, learning who
Hmm.
wrote this, what instruments were used.
Hmm.
Do you think we'll ever come back to that particular situation where not everything like CDs are still out and about? I mean, because me as a music lover, that's one of the things that I like. That was like part of my package for buying my music.
Yeah,
Now
absolutely.
you buy a download and you don't get anything.
Right. It's just straight.
Can we get back to that? Are we going to get back to that?
So it's interesting because things like vinyl are making a comeback now. So anything's possible,
I
right?
saw record players started
Right,
coming
right,
back out
right,
during
right.
the
Record
pandemic.
players are,
Yep.
are, are coming back, and those, so anything is possible. I think with the advent of technology, we're probably never going to go backwards in that sense. But what we are going to do is there's going to be more appreciation for that. I have faith. I speak and teach at Columbia College here in Chicago a few times a year. That's the number one media school in the country.
Wow.
And so I speak a few times a year. And when I speak to those students, they're fascinated by my story, which tells me something. Because here they are, they're the future, and yet they still are fascinated by this story and want to know more. Actually, last year I was voted the favorite speaker, guest speaker, for the whole year, and that was an honor. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that it gets a response, and so the more of our millennials that we can get to realize what came before them
Mm.
and have them then integrate that into what they do now today. And you're starting to see it with some artists right now. There are a lot of great young neo soul artists. You got Lucky Day. You got some really good artists. Lucky Day did a song with Babyface. That's kind of symbolic. You know what I mean? If we can get things like that, then we can continue to see, because nothing new is new.
No, because
Everything,
there is a
nothing under the
response.
sun is new, right?
Everything is